Okay, good morning. My name's Gary Matsuoka, and we're here at Laguna Hills Nursery. In May, we're having our big introductory class. Generally, we do this a couple months earlier, but this year our fig crop wasn't really ready in March. Last year was ready in February. This year, the weather's been so cool overall, especially at night, that the figs didn't start growing until just a few weeks ago. So now we've got them. We'll talk about them and tell you the basics of how to grow them. So there's on figs, they all come from, they considered to originate Eastern Mediterranean, Western Asia. And they said it was probably the first crop that humans ever grew, uh, at least 5,000 years ago, but more likely 13,000. I would say maybe hundreds of thousand years. People have been growing fig trees just because they're so easy to move. You can take a branch off one and stick in the ground, and most often or not, it grows. So they also propagate by seeds really easily. They come up all over the place. The main thing to know though is there's when you grow them from seed, and they do come up in everybody's backyard, usually along the walls where the birds are eating the fruit, and they drop the seeds at the base of the wall. That there are several kinds of figs that can come up. So the most, what you want is the female fruit. Now, figs aren't really quote fruit. They got a different name for them, but they're actually flowers, inside out flowers. So the fruit itself, the parts of the flower inside here, there's a little hole in the bottom where that any pollinating insect can get in there on some figs and pollinate the fruit, and then it starts forming. Most figs that we grow now don't require any pollination. They just develop, fully develop without a pollinator. So that's what we grow primarily is the called the parthenocarpic female figs that'll produce without any type of pollination required. So we like the female figs. You can eat them, but they also make a type of fig called the capra fig, which has the male parts in it. So there's pollen, dusty pollen, stringy anthers from the pollen making parts of the plant. And those you can't really, well, you can eat them, but they're not very good to eat. They're often called goat figs because goats will eat them, but humans generally do not. Um, so the trees can make two different kind of figs from seed, and I've grown quite a few volunteers just to see how they turn out, and it's about half and half. So half turn out to be capra figs, and you don't really want to eat them. Half turn out to be females, and half of those turn out to be pretty good eating figs on top of that. Most figs from volunteers are edible. The females are edible, and most of them are decent. I don't think I've eaten one that was foul tasting or anything, but you do have to be careful. Um, because there are some insects that live inside figs, especially the capra figs. With the male parts, there are wasps that live in there. I had a customer once that said we have a volunteer fig that came up in our yard, and the figs don't taste very good. So I told him, well, bring in a sample. I'll check it out. So they brought in, just an ordinary looking green fig, normal shape. I cut it in half with a knife, and about 30 seconds later, the entire inside of that thing was moving. Little wormy things all throughout. Those were the fig wasp larvae. So I said, okay, don't eat this one. So from that point on, whenever I eat a fig, I open it first just to make sure nothing's inside is moving. Uh, so now on this particular tree, this is the breba crop. This is the spring crop. They call it the breba or spring crop. And on this tree here, You can see a lot of little figs forming among the leaves, and this is the regular crop or the summer fall crop. So the difference is this fig here is not attached to a leaf. All these figs here are attached to the new leaves growing this year. That's the current crop. This fig was one of last year's figs that was forming in the fall. Got too cold, the leaf fell off, so the fig just stayed dormant in the wintertime as a little pea-sized fruit. And then it develops here in the spring, and there's no leaf attached. So you can tell that's the spring crop because it's from last year. So it's the same idea. This was just one from last year that didn't have time to develop. The tree went to sleep with the cold. Now, figs don't need to go to sleep. They don't need any winter at all. We had a customer who was taking figs from California to his other home in Philippines, where it never gets cold. And he says, yeah, the pigs in the Philippines produce fruit year round. They don't stop. There's no winter there. He says the problem in the Philippines is some years it's too wet. It just won't stop raining for weeks on time. So the unfortunate thing about figs is if mature leaves on figs, not the young leaves so much, but the mature leaves are highly subject to a disease called fig rust. It's a fungus disease that attacks the leaves, makes it all spotty, get rust-like spores on the bottom, and then the leaves just fall off, and then they grow new leaves. Fortunately, we don't have rainstorms that last in the summer weeks on end or months on end like they do in the monsoonal regions like the Philippines. And he says we actually lose figs in the Philippines if it doesn't stop raining that summer. So they can't handle constant rain. That's why they're from climates like ours, Mediterranean climates, where there's a warm, dry period in the summertime. But if we get a rain shower, and we all often do every summer, get some kind of rain shower, half inch, quarter inch, then a lot of the current older mature leaves get spotted up and fall off, and the tree makes new ones to replace. So that is a problem, but not a serious one here. Perhaps if you're in Mexico or Arizona where they have a lot of monsoonal conditions, that may be a problem. Although I think they're dry, they are so dry. Usually leaves have to stay wet for 4 or 5 hours for the rust spores to attack the leaf after the rain is stopped. So if we have dry air right after that, like they do in Arizona, New Mexico, then no chance for the rust to form, even if they get wet. And generally, if you get the leaves wet by watering, uh, not a big deal because our air is dry enough that the water droplets usually drop quick enough. So that's the most serious disease we can get. Now there are some pests. We sometimes get spider mites on figs. Not common, but we can get it. So we use oil spray for that. Neem oil is one. There's mineral oils. There's different kinds of essential oils. Just a hard stream of water can knock the mites off. When they get mites, the leaves get little white dots all over them. They turn kind of grayish, covered with little tiny spider webs. And they just stop growing from spider mites. They're pretty easy to control. Now there is a new pest that just arrived, unfortunately, 2 years ago now, called the black fig fly, and it's a nasty one. Hold on one moment. Let me grab some. Okay, the black fig fly is native to the Mediterranean area. So they've been fighting it in Europe for quite a while now, and it went from Europe to South Africa. From South Africa, someone brought some infected fruit, I guess, or plants to Mexico, and from Mexico went to Cuba and now into California. We first saw it last year or a couple of years ago in Ventura and throughout Orange County because the nursery in Ventura was selling plants and people were bringing them through Orange County. So it's now here. So the black fig fly is quite small, black spot, really small, about the size of a fruit fly. So it's small, but you can see it, and it's black body. And the eyes are kind of coral red to orange, dull orange. So it's easy to spot if you see one. Um, the thing about this fly is it lays eggs into the eye of the fig. So the figs have this open spot at the bottom for pollination, and that's where the fly lays its egg. It goes right to that open spot, lays eggs in there, and then the larvae tunnel through a fig about this at this stage, maybe 2 or 3 weeks from ripening. They tunnel through 2 weeks. The book says 2 weeks. So they tunnel through it, and then they make an exit hole about the size, a little smaller than the BB, and drop out of it and pupate in the soil. Anywhere from half an inch to 4 inches deep into the soil. And that fig never fully ripens. There have been a few instances where they had a ripe fig with a dead fly inside, but generally, fortunately, the figs that the flies get into never ripen. They just abort and fall off, and they have holes in them, so you can see it. But it can affect the entire crop, so that's the problem. Uh, so the University of California hasn't officially gave us any ways to control it. We know in Europe in France they're using a product called deltametrin, which is a synthetic pyrethroid, which is fairly non-toxic to humans. I think we use that deltametrin methrin in some indoor pest products, but not registered for use in California. And they said it doesn't stop at 100%, but it gets rid of a lot of them. So that's not the perfect one. Um, Now, this farm owner, I think he was experimenting with things. You just cover the ostial, the eye at the bottom fig. He says the problem he's had is that nothing sticks well enough. As the fig grows, it, it it leaves gaps, and the larva can still crawl underneath that thing and get inside the fly can still lay their eggs underneath that little. He was using what looked like little stickers on the eye. So we've got to find something that's gooey, that's edible, that you can place there. So the other way to stop it 100% is to get one of these organza bags and put it around the fruit and tie it up. He says this is 100%, but he says it takes at least 10 seconds to wrap each fig, and that can be time consuming if you got a big tree, but that will stop it, the fig flies from getting in there. The other way is they show entire trees being draped in the same material. So you can drape entire branches or entire trees at a time. And it's doable on figs because the figs we generally eat do not require pollination. There's one exception that we sell, but other than that, we can cover the entire fig or the entire tree with a mesh, and the fig fly can't affect it. The other thing that we're seeing at our growing ground last year, we saw one hole in one fig, got rid of the fig, never saw anything after that. We think that if you grow them in containers, the chance of them finding dirt to pupate in is rather low. They might drop on the sidewalk and that's it. They're going to be a meal for some other insect before they can turn into an adult. So growing them in pots because at our growing grounds, everything's in pots. And we saw one hole for the entire year in one fig. That's it. So we think the fig flies were buzzing around looking for stuff. They found one fig. They might have, done that one fig, but they couldn't find a place to pupate. So the next generation, they said there could be 6 generations or more a year. we don't think we got past the first generation at all at the growing ground, just because they're in pots and the ground, there's no dirt around them. It's just weed block cloth on the ground. So that may have helped. But yeah, some of our customers and friends and associates have been highly affected by this fig fly. At my own house in Orange, no sign of it. And here at the nursery, we haven't seen any attacks at all yet. So just be aware that it's out there and know what has been done for it. There are traps that they trap the male. You know, they can't trap the females, but they trap the male flies to help prevent fertile females with yeast. Um, and they said that the adults feed on latex from the figs. From either the overripe fig, as it skin cracks, a little latex comes out, or if a branch breaks off, or you cut a branch and you get that oozing latex, the adult flies come and feed on that. So they've actually had instances where they took they just break a stem off and cover the stem around it with tanglefoot, and it traps the flies because they're attracted to the latex leaking out. So that's what's being done in Europe. Nothing's perfect, but apparently they can. You know, this works if you want to. You know, those aren't too expensive, 10 to 15 cents each for those bags. But that's the black fig fly, which is something new. And hopefully, the University of California will give us guidelines soon. But this is what they've done in Europe, where they've been dealing with it for a while. Okay, so we generally sell fertile female figs that don't need any wasp pollination. This particular one here is supposed to need it. So this is, I'll just put the name down of that one first. So in fact, these are some names I just wrote down so you don't have to write them down. So this is kind of a funny name. It's unknown distillery or something like that. It was supposed the nursery down in San Diego County ordered a pastillary, and it came in, and they said this isn't it, but it's really good. So we'll call it the unknown. You know, if they don't have a name, sometimes they get the wrong plant. Sometimes they call it the unknown one of that. So unknown pastillary, but it makes medium-sized figs that are brick red. It's the reddest fig we've seen. They got a nice berry flavor, fruity flavor. It's supposed to need wasp pollination, but we have so many, you know, besides the eating figs, the wasps inhabit the ornamental figs. So we've got millions of fig trees in Southern California, both the edible figs and the ornamental ones. There's plenty of places for the fig wasps to hide out. And apparently, if we have a unknown Phacelia plant here at the nursery, about 2/3 to 3/4 of the figs will develop. So we know that if it needs a wasp, the wasp is doing it. Some turn yellow and fall off, which means they didn't get pollinated by the wasp, but most of them make good figs. And they make a lot of them. You can see how productive this one is. I don't have any other tree in the nursery right now that's making fruit like this one is. So, so they're quite good. Um, Now, as far as growing figs, it's fortunate figs are really, really tolerant of just about any soil you grow them in. So we prefer that you grow figs in either our in they're in pots, that is, either our top pot or our acid mix. Either one of these works well with figs. Um, the difference between these two, this has more peat moss. It's half peat moss. That one has 1/3 peat. So the peat moss holds the water. with these big leaves, they're using a lot of water, so the peat moss does help it hold more moisture. The disadvantage of peat moss is it does shrink over time. It actually decays and shrinks over time. However, we don't see any drop in the soil level in the pots because figs make so many roots, thick roots, that the soil actually expands after a while, and the pots eventually burst open from the volume of the fig roots. So we don't really see any loss of volume with any soils. Even the raw, you get the regular commercial type soils that are made with wood compost or tree compost of some sort. Figs put up with it. It won't kill them. So you can grow figs in just about anything you want. Generally, if the soil, like we have a lot of our friends grow them in was called Pro Mix by Sunshine Sungrow Nurse Supplier, and that's like 80% peat. Works really well for 3 or 4 years, and then because its peat gets so sludgy after 3 or 4 years, the plants kind of decline. Doesn't kill them, but they don't do as well after that. So that one works for them. It's so easy to start new fig trees that they have no problem starting new ones after 3 or 4 years and using that Pro Mix. Now, the way we propagate figs, of course, you grow them from seed, but then you don't know what you're going to get. 1/4, we figure about 1/4 of the ones from seed will be good to eat. Of course, that's how all new figs are found, as they grow seeds, and you might get something that's not edible, you might get something that's good, you might get something that's really good. Uh, so most of the fig varieties around the world were just chance seedlings. Now, the way we propagate a fig to clone it, so figs are real easy from stem cuttings. So on this particular plant here, this stem right here is 1 year old. Down here, it's about 2 years old. Looks like it was done from my cuttings 3 winters ago. So this grew last year up to about here, and then this grew, 2 years ago, and then last year grew up to there and had a few side branches. So on this plant, even though this stem, there's still already leaves up there, you can probably still cut this in a piece of stem this long or even this long with 2 nodes on it. The bottom node will grow roots, the top node will grow leaves. You stick that in some sterile potting soil, like our acid mix is considered sterile. It's just peat moss and pumice. Put that in there, sink it in so that only half-inch or inch of the top of the stem sticks out of there. It usually grows. Um, we've seen, figs done from just stem cuttings in the summer. So you have this green growth coming out in the summertime. A friend of mine was rooting his leafy cuttings in the summer. I looked at him, a few days after he put them in a pot, totally wilted. I thought, not going to make it. 2 weeks later, go back, and they're growing. Things wilted down to nothing, and then they start growing. So figs can be real powerful. Not all figs are easy to grow from cuttings. Some are difficult. So most of the ones in the trade that are common are the ones that can be grown from cuttings rather easily. And we usually do it in, late November through the end of February. We're doing the cuttings. The plants are growing after that. Um, you want to keep the cuttings in a shady location. Well, it can be sunny, but it's got to stay cool for at least a month or so to develop the roots in the 50s. If you're in the 50-degree range, the cutting will develop roots. You don't want it to grow leaves too fast because it may not have roots left yet. So we try to keep them in the 50-degree range. This year was great. It was like 50 degrees underneath their benches for 3 months straight, it seems. So most of them did quite well, got a good root system. Once the leaves are, about this big, we figure they have roots. Sometimes they'll make a few small leaves about this big, and if they have no roots, they just wilt and die, especially if you have any heat at all. But once the leaves are that big, we know they've got roots. You can always, of course, um, Well, sometimes if you're rooting figs, you can put them in a clear plastic cup with a hole in the bottom so you can see when the roots come out. Of course, it is easy for us just to take this and do this, and you can see some roots forming on that. So that one's pretty much ready now. We'd rather leave them in these pots. I mean, you know, if you're careful like that, you can take them out and replant them. But we like to leave them in the pots till they're about a foot tall. Then we know the roots are really well knit. Like here's one that's really taken off now. See how these roots look compared. It's got quite a bit there. Yeah, that's pretty well knit now. So they don't usually come out straight up. They usually come off to one side just because the cutting we usually take has side buds that the stem shoots out the side, goes up. You can straighten out with a stake. You can take cuttings off the ends of the stems in winter too, if they're thick. If they're really thin, not so good. And you can take 1-year-old wood. You can take 2-year-old wood. The book says you can even do 3-year-old wood. Which this plant here, that wood at the base is probably 5 years old, so that's probably too old to make a cutting out of. Generally in pots, you need to fertilize them in the ground. You watch them grow. I mean, fig trees often find their own fertilizer in real dirt, and most of them grow so fast. We don't usually encourage them much. I mean, if they're not, if the leaves are pale green, then you can throw a little mulch around them, or kind of an all-purpose organic fruit tree fertilizer is fine. Nothing special for figs. They don't need much help. And once they're rooted into the ground, they don't need much water. In pots, they always need a lot of water. They got the big leaves. But in the ground, they've got great suction. The roots grow really fast. They'll find the water. So there's a lot of figs. Orange County, suddenly everyone deserts the properties. You'll see fig trees growing all over the place. They'll survive. Okay, so soil is not an issue. Any type of soil on the ground will grow in it, unless it's just sitting in a swamp area. They don't like that. But any soil, clay, sand, rock, they can grow in that. Now, the main thing we have to do with figs is a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them can grow 30 foot tall. And sometimes it only takes them 5 years to do it. And at that height, you just can't pick the fruit. So the option is to cut them back every winter. Now, whenever you cut a fig, like this trunk here, this base of this is probably 5 years old, 4 years old, 3 years old, 2 years old, current growth. Um, so you can see here, we cut this back. This particular year, 2 years ago, we cut it back to within a couple inches of where that growth started. So this branch, we didn't cut it back this winter, but we could have cut it down to here, and these two nodes here on this, at the base of this branch, would have sprouted branches that make fruit. So that we don't like to cut them, if you cut them down to here, they'll grow plenty of branches, no fruit for 1 year. They fruit best off of 1-year-old wood. Occasionally they'll fruit off of 2-year-old wood. But we like to cut them down to the current wood, but cut off 99% of it, because sometimes they'll put on over 10 foot of growth, cut it down to the last couple nodes, and then they'll get that same branch growing the next year with figs all the way to the top of it. Again, if you cut it down too short, you'll get branches that won't fruit that particular year. So, but then if you cut it right the next year, you'll get fruit the next year. So if you see pictures of old fig orchards in the winter especially, they'll have big stumps in the ground with short branches on top of them. Or they cut all the branches down to within a few inches. Then, of course, they'll grow out like this with figs all the way to the top. The next winter, they'll cut them to about here. And we do get branches coming out from other parts of the tree that no fruit on them that year, and then you can cut this one off and save this one, and then the next year that'll fruit too, whatever grows off of that. So you can keep your tree pretty much the same size all its life. If it's a full size fig tree, you want to keep it shorter. There are dwarf figs that don't grow very tall. We'll go across some of the names of those too. Now, there are other diseases figs can get that are of not huge consequence. So figs can get viruses, and most figs have them. Um,
Yeah, so I think the plums are 55.
Okay.
so this leaf here has got kind of a mottled coloring. So that's usually a virus that does that. And sometimes you get strangely shaped leaves, and that would be a virus too. Some really weird growth. I'm not seeing too much on these. Here's a weird shaped leaf here.
Okay. Okay.
Now that might have been damaged, so that may not be virus. But a lot of times the viruses make weird shaped leaves or variegations that are really not symmetrical or anything. So the problem with figs is that they can actually get the viruses out of them. So most figs at one time or another have gone to a tissue culture lab to get the viruses out, especially if they're coming in from Europe, they're full of viruses. Tissue culture lab will take it. When you do a tissue culture, you're taking individual cells from the growth tip that aren't diseased yet. They said that in the growth tip of any plant, the very tip of it has no circulation yet. The viruses can't get to the cells at the tip of the branch. So they take those cells and put them in a petri dish and culture them and get new plants that are virus free. So now we tried those once. We went to a tissue culture lab in Florida, ordered some figs. The problem when you order tissue cultured plants is they can spend 2, 3, 4, 5 years acting like seedlings. So when you grow a fig from a seedling, the leaves come out very snowflake-like. So on the oldest fig varieties, it's interesting. Most of the leaves are shaped like spades, just like that. They're not lobes. On the baby trees, they look like snowflakes. They're often shaped like this. And as they mature, they get fewer and fewer lobes. As the whole plant genetically gets older, it seems like they have fewer and fewer lobes. A lot of the old varieties just have no lobes. There's an entire leaf like that rather than this. But when we get them tissue cultured, they look like this for years sometimes, and they won't fruit. They have real skinny branches. It's like when you grow them from seed, and it takes them a long time to mature. So they act like seedlings. Some of them revert back to mature growth right away. But gosh, I have some in our growing grounds. We've been working with those plants for 6 years now. They still have the same thin stems, same snowflake-like leaves. They're not maturing on us. So that's the problem with that whole tissue culture thing. You can run across that. And the other problem with viruses is they're transmitted by microscopic mites. Erythroid, I can't remember how to spell that. Mites that can travel with the wind. You can't see them. They inject their toxins into the leaf to feed on them, and at the same time the viruses go in. So you can clean up your whole crop of figs, have a whole clean crop, and then some infected mites come in and you're stuck the same thing. Now the viruses that affect the growth only seem to affect the growth in the cool weather. So viruses, just like when we get viruses, you get a fever, cooks the virus. It just hates that. It pretty much wipes out the virus. So when we have 80-degree weather, the plants all seem to grow normal leaves again. So the viruses are only seen easily in early spring. Then by summer, you don't even notice them anymore. We just know that most figs have it. You can't really do much about it. Um, any questions on culture? I mean, most of our figs have a small spring crop like this one that ripens before summer usually, and then a huge summer fall crop that can start as early as July or as late as September and then go all the way until it gets cool. Some figs just have one big crop September, but most figs, the nice thing about figs is they'll ripen, unlike stone fruit that ripen their whole crop within 2 to 3 weeks, figs will often produce for half the year. The disadvantage of that is that a bird can get every single fig. Whereas if you have a peach tree full of 400 peaches ripening, the birds don't usually get most of those. But figs, we do have to do things to keep them off. Now, this bag does work on most critters, birds, doesn't work on raccoons. So that is a problem. Oh, we do carry a plastic blow up snake. So back in the 80s, when I first started growing figs, I had 20 fig trees. It's like an aviary in my backyard. It's just crazy. So I went to Disneyland and bought a realistic looking rubber snake that was about this big. Hung it on the fig tree, didn't hear a bird for 2 weeks. They hate snakes, so that we carry a cheaper one, but it'll work for a while. I mean, unfortunately, they get used to it after 2 weeks. I would think if you keep moving that snake around or hide it for a while and then bring it back out, hide it for a while, bring it back out, that'll keep them off for quite a while. They also don't like hanging shiny things. Um, but squirrels are the worst, hard to stop them. Possums are easy to trap. Rats and mice, you can put out bubble gum and kill those. So, the other nice thing about figs is that you can grow them in pots on a patio, on a balcony. If you got at least half day of sun, they turn out pretty good. Now, just so you know, I've grown figs in total light shade underneath big trees. They make a full crop, no taste at all. So the more sunlight you get on a fig, the better the flavor. So, at my last house I lived at, most of my yard was half a day. But I noticed when I grew the same fig at our growing grounds in full sun, way better taste. A lot stronger flavor, a lot more sugar in it. So the more sun you get on them, the better the flavor. Um, half a day is decent. You'll get some, they'll be good to eat in half a day of sun. But the more sun you have, the better they taste. And they will produce again in full shade. There's no flavor. Um, Water-wise, to get the best fruit size and to prevent splitting, keep the soil evenly moist. I used to have a fig in a spot near another big tree that was stealing a lot of the water, and I'd water the tree from drip system every few days, but all the fruit would just split open because what was happening near this big mature tree is that tree was sucking all the moisture out between the waterings, so the fig would shrink, and then I'd water it and go just blow open. So it looked like a flower, a big open flower. And I couldn't get any good figs on that tree just because I didn't know what was going on. But it is the fact that that tree next to it was stealing the moisture in between. So the fruit was shrinking and then I watered and it would just blow out. So it'd be better just to keep it really wet. And that when you have tree competition around, you got to keep the soil wetter so that the figs don't dry up. But once they dry up and they shrink a bit, and you water them, and the moisture goes in so quickly, the skin can't stretch, and it just splits it wide open. So they can also get nematodes in the roots. So if you got a fig that's not growing fast, that's not making much fruit, just sitting around looking ill. If you dig down into the soil, if you have sandy soil especially, normally the fig roots in the ground will look like spider webs. They'll be nice and straight. They might be thick, but they'll be straight like this. What I noticed at my first house I lived at in real sandy soil is on the one tree that wasn't growing well, the roots look like knots of cottage cheese or something like that. So just knobby roots throughout around the tree, and the tree was just not doing well. So that's a microscopic worm that called a root knot nematode. There are most nematodes are good guys, but there are some bad ones too. Nematode, and we do have product that's supposed to help that. It's yucca extract that's supposed to make them so they can't reproduce, so keep the numbers real low. Uh, but one way I actually thought to do was to grow grass around the roots of my trees. And so we know our textbook on grasses says that cool season grasses, bluegrass, ryegrass, fescue, even some of the weeds, foxtail grasses, they're immune to nematodes because the roots put out chemicals that kill them. So I planted ryegrass around this tree, let it grow for 3 months, and then I pulled the ryegrass off like a piece of saw. I looked at the roots, couldn't find any evidence of nematodes. Now, I've never seen that as a cure formally written, but it's worked for me on fig trees, on white sapote trees, on banana trees. It seemed to cure them each time I did that. So if you see that, you might try that as a cure. Ryegrass or some kind of ryegrass we like because it sprouts in 2 or 3 days. Fescue sprouts in 2 or 3 weeks. Bluegrass sprouts in a month, so there's different speeds that they grow. Um, and that seems to kill the nematodes. When we tried it out front, it seemed to work too. We had nematodes in our acid mix. Acid mix is like sand; it's very airy. So we grew oats in there one winter, and it seemed to work. Oats are also a cool season grass. Okay, enough about culture. I think I covered just about everything. I mean, normally we don't prune them during the growing season because you'll be cutting off figs developing, but it's not a big deal. You cut back a stem that's growing, it'll just make another stem or two, and then they'll start making fruit also. So, okay, I'm not going to talk about all the figs we carry. We carry so many, I can't even remember a lot of them, and we get new figs in from a fig collectors. The famous one up north that we like to promote, David Burke Family Farms. Can't remember what city they're in. Started with an R, but they're in the Central Valley, and he collects figs from us, from his neighbors. He travels around the state looking at figs growing in fence lines and tries them out. If they're good, uh, he'll promote them. He gives some to us. We try them out. They do well here. So we're in a cool coastal region. So some figs don't do well here. Um, the most popular fig in the world, we call it Cadota. The proper name for this fig, a lot of things, they come to the United States and the names get massacred by people who don't speak well. Uh, in Italy, where this comes from, it's Dotata. But somehow it got changed to Godota when it came to when it came to the United States. That is the most popular fig in the world. It likes it really hot here because honey fig is just sweet. Doesn't have much flavor, just sweet fig. So in Fresno, you go to Central Valley, this is their favorite fig. Here, it's mildly sweet. It's not hugely popular near the coast. So near the coast, we have some trouble because we're cool. So there's a few figs we don't promote much, or that we know that if it's a cloudy week before it ripens, no flavor. And I'll mention some of those that we have. Like Cadota, which is the most popular fig in the world, is better in a hotter summer climate than right here. We're a little cool for some fig trees. And we're also a little humid. So the figs that have the big osteolar eye at the bottom, a lot of those we've tried and no longer sell because when you have that open eye, now there are figs with closed eyes where the eye is just a little slit. And that's closed eye fig. Uh, Possibly that the black fig fly can't get in those, but I think it still can. But the big open eyes, when we have the real humid weather, sometimes in the summer we get this misty weather coming in, and everything with the open eye starts molding on us. There's this penicillin mold that gets in there, and you smell the fruit; it's sour. So the one fig we gave up on real fast is one that's really popular. It's white Genoa. Big open eye. Wasn't working for us. Every time a tree would make a lot of fruit and it would all get sour. So we kind of quit carrying that one. Now we do have at least one fig that we like that has an open eye. So just be aware of that. If you live near the coast, it may not be the fig for you. If you live in Riverside or in Fullerton, you're probably just fine. So, okay. So those two popular figs. So the figs, there's a lot of different, they all taste similar. They're all figs, but there are some different flavors. So the big sweet ones like the Cadota are called the honey figs. So not much acidity in them. The acidity is the flavor. Lots of sweetness to them. So they're called the honey figs. And then there are some called the jammy figs, which taste like jam. And then there's some that are called the berry flavored figs, which have a real high acidity. They give you that real sharp flavor that, say, a strawberry would, uh, or a blackberry would. So that's kind of the range of flavors. I mean, there's a lot of them that are in betweeners. So it's a little hard to describe them. The top rated fig in the world goes by two names. Um, you can see it's got more of a spade-like. Well, here this made both kind, three lobes, and then it went to a spade leaf. But this is Black Madeira. I met someone whose family's from Madeira. Said we don't call it Black Madeira, we call it Figo Preto, which in Portuguese, so it's from the Portuguese island Madeira is that off of Africa or off of Portugal? I don't call where it's from, where the island is, but on the island of Madeira, they call it Figo Preto, the dark fig. It was brought to the United States to the Portuguese colony near La Jolla. And one of our employees swears that it's the original tree. It's a tree that he grew up across the street from. He says it's a real good fig. So it's a fairly large black bell-shaped fruit. And a jammy flavor. It may not be always the best, but it's always really good. So, it may be the best because it's consistent. You don't get bad fruit off it. Produces real well. So if it's labeled either Black Madeira, which we didn't have time to just put BM on those, or Figo Preto, it's the same tree. But we keep them separate because we got this from one collector and we got this from another source. So we want to keep them same just in case they're not. But according to the people from Madeira, they call their fig the Figo Preto. So, and anyone else calls it the Black Madeira because it's a dark fig from Madeira. So that one is supposedly the top rated fig in the world. However, there's a lot of good, darn good figs. Real similar, Galicia Negra. Uh, um, um, I like Black Ischias. There's a lot of them that are very similar. Now, they do say that there are a lot of figs out there that have different names. They're all the same fig also. So just be aware that they're brought from, from other countries. People smuggle them in from their homelands. I got one 40 years ago from an Italian family. They said this has been passed down generation from generation. They had no name for it. It looked exactly like one we had called Italian Everberry. And since it was from Italy, we figured, oh, it's probably the same fig. But it looked like a brown turkey fig, just a ordinary looking brownish fig, brownish purple fig. But a lot of figs change with the seasons. Like the town everbearing, sometimes in the spring it's mostly green. Sometimes in the late summer it's mostly purple. The inside color changes too. Sometimes you open a fig up, it's amber colored inside, and sometimes it's red. The same fruit off the same tree, but at different times of the different seasons. So the color of the flesh can change with the temperature. We don't know. I haven't tracked them well enough to tell you, but I would say later in the year they seem to be more red, early in the year more amber on the same tree. So we'll go over some notable ones. We do like this one called Bourgeois Sauté. I don't know how to pronounce the French. It's, Grise, I believe, means dark. So Bourgeois Sauté Grise. This one's quite good. It's supposed to be the most popular fig grown in England, even though it's from France. We do notice that this one needs full sun to get its full flavor, but in full sun, it's really, really good. Now, we think from the same collection comes the panache, because panache is a really popular fig, because there is a fig called Buja Sorte Panache or Panache. We just call it Panache or Tiger. This one is one we grow that has an open eye. So we caution people. We do say, okay, it's got an open eye. You can't lose your entire crop some years, but it's really good. So when the tiger fig gets enough sun and heat, it tastes like you mix cherries with the fig. It's got a distinct cherry flavor to it. So right now in the Central Valley, there are farms growing nothing but tiger figs because all the restaurants want them. They said we can fry this thing. It's so good tasting. And the other thing about it is the fruit looks like a little hot air balloon. So if you hold the fruit upside down, it's cream colored, but it's got green stripes. So you hold upside down, it's like a little hot air balloon, and it's brilliant red inside. It's one of the reddest figs you'll ever see inside. So incredible looking. The open eye is a problem. They can revert back to a green fig. So what you'll notice about panache, it does have some variegation in the leaves, subtle, but it's there. You can see a little variegation, not mottled like the viruses look, but just more or less variegated. And the stems have stripes on them. I don't know if you can see the stripe. There's some orange stripes on this stem. Now, on my big tree at my house, we noticed that one branch just lost its stripes and the figs just turned out green. You know, I didn't think they were as good, but that might have just been psychological because they didn't have the stripes on the fruit. So they can revert back to a normal one. Here's the other striped fig is this one. Look, the figs look a little different. So this one is Col de Dame Ramada. Ramada means striped. And you can kind of see vague stripes on the stems on there. Haven't seen much leaf. Oh yeah, I can see on this leaf here, variegation, very faint variegation in the middle of the leaf also. This one has a closed eye. So far, the fruit hasn't impressed me as much as the panache. The fruit on panache, it's hard to beat the taste on that, the unique flavor on that. This one so far hasn't been quite as good as panache, but no mold. It's got a closed eye. And it's still got that unique, it looks very similar in striping, except, well, actually, the Col de Dame Ramada is more this shape. The tiger fig is actually a little bit more round shaped, more like this, more bell shaped. And then this Col de Dame Ramada is more teardrop shaped. Now, there is another striped fig out there that's real famous that we have a few of out there. Not too many. Martinica Ramada. And then there's an LSU Tiger. Both good figs. I mean, Martinica Ramada is supposed to be a dark striped fig. I got this from a good collector, so we trust that the source was good, but the stripes so far have been real indistinct. But the trees we have are so young yet, could barely take cuttings off them this year. So we'll have to grow the tree in a bigger pot and see if the figs come out more distinctly striped. So it's supposed to be a kind of a brownish or purplish fig with dark stripes on it. But so far, again, not distinct. LSU Tiger is, they call it a striped fig, but it's just the veins. So there's a lot of figs with dark veins, and LSU Tiger seems to be that way. However, I love the flavor on that. It's real fruity flavor on that one. This one I've only eaten one fruit so far, so I haven't been able to tell the flavor on that one. But it's quite well known because it is a dark stripe fig rather than a light stripe fig. Now another one that is really good is I-258. Doesn't have a proper name yet. And so there was a collection of figs brought from Italy to California many years ago. And they said, well, the problem with Italy is no one names their figs. It's just their fig. So they just gave numbers. Over 500 figs were brought to the collection in California, and they tried them, and a few of them stood out. I-258, maybe the best of that group. So it has, I guess I stands for Italian, number 258. And that one seems to be the most popular one. It is a similar to Bujasorte, kind of a ground turkey type fig, kind of this shape, good size, medium colors. You can even be anywhere from greenish with a little brown tinge to totally brown purple. Last year at our growing grounds, best tasting fig we had. It was better last year than the Black Madeiras and Figo Prados were. So this is an awful good fig too. We have quite a few of these out there. Everybody's asking for I-258. So the University of California actually It's great. I actually developed some figs for the Central Valley. So there is a famous fig that needs a wasp called a Smyrna fig. It is the real, if you go to Trader Joe's, you'll get these dried Smyrna figs from, well, they can be from they grow them in California too, but they are found in Italy or Portugal, Spain, and it's got to be pollinated by wasps. And it's funny. The funny story is that the farmers in California were brought this fig tree back in the late 1800s, and they weren't told it needed a wasp. So they grew this fig tree, the Smyrna fig, for years, and the flowers would form, or they start forming, they all fall off, and they went back to Portugal and asked them, "What do you guys sell us?" So, well, we forgot to tell you, you need to have the fig wasp. So, so that's when they brought the fig wasp over to California. So the problem with Smyrna figs is that you need two orchards, one to grow the figs that get the wasp, and the other one to grow the Smyrna figs. Now, the Smyrna figs are famous because they're really big, really light colored figs. The seeds, they're not hard, but they make a crunching sound. So, and they're really good flavor. So they got texture, flavor, size. They're great for drying. They have that Fig Newton flavor, but they need a wasp to pollinate them. So it's a pain for the orchards because they said you have to grow the wasp in the other orchard in the figs. And they say you put 8 figs with wasps underneath each Smyrna tree. You have enough wasps to pollinate the fruit. If you have too many wasps, the fruit gets too much pollen and they all split open. So you got to make sure there's only 8 figs underneath each Smyrna fig tree to get the right number of wasps there. Now, you're not supposed to, no one cares really, although you might care. So if you buy a Smyrna fig at the store, there's probably a dead wasp inside that was trying to find. What they're doing is these female wasps hatch out of these figs looking for, no, male wasps hatch out of the figs looking for a female wasp to mate with. So they go into these Smyrna figs looking for the female and never find it. And they often die inside the figs. So you eat a Smyrna fig, you're eating a little tiny dead wasp in there. You get a little more protein with that one. So University of California worked for 40 years to develop a fig like the Smyrna that didn't need a pollen. Now, one of the offshoots of that research was Flanders. They said Flanders not what we're looking for, but this is so good we can't throw it away. So they just gave it to the public. And when we first ate the Flanders in the 80s, we said, well, this is the best fig we've ever eaten. Since then, the stuff from Europe and around the world's come in, and those are probably a little better, but Flanders still a really, really good fig. So that's a large olive colored, olive green fig, long neck, purple veining, bright red meat, really good, strong, acidic strawberry flavor. So that's a really good one. If you like, more flavorful figs, this one's got it. But the figs they ultimately ended up with were called Sierra and Sequoia. Sierra, they said that's more of a farming one. It gets real big. Sequoia is kind of a short tree for homeowners. So we have sequoias out there. So real big honey fig type, interesting crunchy seeds. Can't feel them, but you can kind of hear them in your mouth when you're eating it. Kind of gives you a nice crunch. So closed eye, everything's perfect on that. I mean, they work so long on that fig. It's an ants, that's ancestors would be probably Cadota, but that's one they released. I think Tina might have come out of that same breeding program, TENA. I don't know if we're growing any Tinas this year, but Sequoia and Sierra are the two that they said this is what we were looking for. Big, you can dry them if you like. Really good. I will mention, back in the 90s, I had a volunteer come on my yard that I really liked, called Gary Strawberry, but it actually is very similar to Flanders. I did not have a Flanders in my yard. I had a tiger fig and a Italian everbearing in my yard, and this was a volunteer, and it colored just like the Flanders, except it's not elongated; it's more round, but it's got the same purple veining, same bright red flesh, very similar, strong strawberry flavor. However, just so you know, I usually recommend Flanders over this because this is genetically younger, and some of the offspring of it don't fruit the first year. They have real skinny leaves like the snowflake leaves because genetically it's only what 30 years old now. Yeah, about just about exactly 30 years old. Whereas Flanders is probably genetically 40 or 50 years old. So this one's a bit younger, but very similar. I'm happy that this one was one of the few figs that were volunteers that actually turned out good. Now some of the other ones notable, LSU purple. So all the LSU figs were meant for wet, humid climates. So if you are close to the ocean, you suffer from rust or mold. These are supposed to not get rust or mold. So LSU purple and then the LSU tiger are two of those that we grow. So shouldn't see rust on these leaves, or hopefully not. Here's one local one that I really liked. I mean, I have a lot of people give me local, volunteers from their yard. Most of them we like them. They go, okay, they're okay. They're not distinct. They're not that great. This one came out really good. Now, the lady who gave this to me is not named, her neighbor is Don Saden. And they share a fence. And at the south end of this fence, this volunteer came up. And so she called it Don Saden South for that reason. But that's a good fig. I mean, it's hard to describe. It's fairly large, amber to greenish amber, sometimes light purple, no striping, never cracks open, got a nice tough skin so it doesn't crack. Really good flavored. Hard to describe it, but I like them. I'll eat every one off our tree at the growing ground. It's a real tasty fig. So Don Saden South, one of the few local volunteer figs that I've actually liked or thought was unique because it doesn't look like any other fig we have. And of course, the fig that's been around California the longest is Black Mission. We tend to grow the Vista Black Mission, which is this a slight variant of the Black Mission that has shorter internodes on the branches. So normally the Black Mission will have internodes about so long. The Vista Black Mission, the nodes are real short, so you get more leaves close together and more fruit close together, even though they grow the same size. So they both can grow. This is Black Mission can both grow 30 foot if you don't trim them. But this one, the leaves are set closer together, and so you get more fruit. You get a fruit every, instead of 1 foot apart, you get them like 6 inches or even closer than that. So everyone says that Vista Black Mission is better than the original Black Mission. If you like, Black Mission or small to medium sized fruit, the summer crop is medium sized and they get smaller and smaller as you go into winter, but they're very good tasting, jammy type flavored figs. Closed eye. One has been grown here for hundreds and hundreds of years. A good friend safe says that this is an heirloom from his homeland. I guess somewhere. I'm not sure if he's from Iran or one of those countries nearby. But Bayardi is supposed to be a real popular fig in the Middle East. It's another big honey fig, quite good and very vigorous. I noted that when I first started going, this thing is really vigorous. I mean, they just jump out of our pots from the cuttings here. All of them are real already big plants. So, so in the Middle East, our Turkey is considered the center. No, Turkey is the center of pomegranates. Center of figs is, still in the Middle East somewhere, where most of the figs are real popular. Any other questions on any other fig varieties? I don't know all of them by heart. I mean, one of the new ones that David Burke promoted last year that everybody seems to like is Jolly Rancher, like the candy. They said it tastes just like the candy. So that's a good one too. See if there's any left that are real notes here. Well, there is an unusual fig, yellow long neck. It is bright yellow, and it does have quite a long neck. Can't remember who the breeder was. That might have been University of California too, but this one does have some trouble if it's too cloudy. It doesn't get moldy though. Just the flavor isn't at its best, so we know it's a little better inland, or if we have a week of warm weather before it ripens, they're really good. So I have a few of these around, but bright yellow, large fig. There are a few yellow figs out there. I did bring it in. So Mary Lane was my favorite fig before Flanders came around. The Mary Lane, um, kind of a yellow fig, real mellow flavored fig. Mary Lane. Originally it was Mary Lane seedless. I don't know. Figs don't really have hard seeds, so it's not like it's any different than a regular fig. But Mary Lane seedless is a famous one from the 80s. That we're happy to still have that one around. Okay. So figs are scattered underneath all the tables, all the way around this side. They're all $29. Try to look for ones with decent sized leaves on them. I mean, we can check it for roots for you if you like, just to make sure. But if the leaves look anything like these, they should be rooted. All right. Thank you.